Ever wondered how we got here? I don't just mean you and me, but all of this. It's the story of how our species, against some pretty crazy odds, went from these scattered, wandering tribes to building the vast, interconnected world we live in today. So let's take a look at the blueprint of civilization. Right. This is the big question, isn't it? It's the core of our entire shared story. We're the only human species left. So how did Homo sapiens pull it off? How did we achieve global dominance through this thing we call civilization? Well, the answer starts with a huge and honestly a kind of painful trade-off. Just look at this contrast. On one side, you've got the hunter-gatherer, tall, athletic, always on the move. And on the other, the farmer, shorter, stuck in one place. Now, this wasn't just a change in lifestyle, it was a physical one. A less varied, grain-heavy diet and the diseases that spread like wildfire in crowded settlements meant we literally shrank. We traded 6 inches of height and our athleticism for the stability of a reliable food source. And that stability, that was the spark. The agricultural revolution is our first key building block. It's the moment where everything, and I mean everything, changes. Think about it. Instead of chasing our food, we learned to create it. In places like the ancient Sumerian city of Uruk, harvesting wheat and barley meant we didn't have to move anymore. And that allowed populations to just explode, giving birth to the world's very first cities. Okay, so you've got thousands of people living together now. What do? You need a system. You need some kind of hardware to organize the whole thing. Let's look at a couple of early blueprints. Over in Babylon, King Hammurabi came up with one of the first legal systems, and it was direct. An eye for an eye. But then look at Law 199. It also created a society based on caste. A slave's eye was explicitly worth less than a freeman's. There was no pretending about equality here. It was written right into the code.
Now, Egypt's blueprint was different, a super rigid social pyramid. At the very top, you have the pharaoh, who was seen as a literal god on earth. Under him, you've got bureaucrats and priests running the show. Then soldiers, scribes, merchants, and way down at the bottom, the massive majority, the peasants and slaves whose labor fueled the entire empire. Everyone had a place, and that place was designed to serve the divine ruler.
And this level of organization, it lets you build some amazing public works. What's so fascinating is how these projects show you a civilization's priorities. I mean, while the Indus Valley civilization was building incredibly advanced toilet and drainage systems to keep people healthy, Egypt was busy building the pyramids to make sure the pharaoh had a smooth trip into the afterlife. But it's not just about laws and pyramids, right? A civilization needs software, a shared set of beliefs, a common story that holds it all together. In ancient Greece, we see 2 totally different operating systems competing. You had Sparta, which was basically a military machine, harsh, hierarchical, built for war. And then you have their neighbor, Athens, trying something absolutely radical, democracy. They were literally picking citizens by random lottery to serve on the council, and all citizens could vote in the assembly. Now, not everyone was a fan of this Athenian experiment. The philosopher Plato thought it was kind of barbaric. He argued that ruling is a skill, just like navigating a ship. You wouldn't pick a random person to steer a ship through a storm, would you? So why would you let them steer the entire state?
And that's the killer question, isn't it? Plato wanted a philosopher king, but the problem is pretty much every ruler in history has believed that they were the wisest one for the job.
Over in China, the Zhou dynasty had a different idea, the mandate of heaven. The thinking was that the emperor's right to rule came from the gods, but, and this is a big but, it wasn't permanent. If a ruler became corrupt or unjust, the heavens would send signals, like floods or famines. It was basically a sign that they'd lost the divine blessing and it was time for a new dynasty to take over. So, what happens when these unique civilizations, with their completely different hardware and software, inevitably run into each other? Well, the results, war, diplomacy, and trade, would end up shaping the entire world. Okay, so the Egyptians and the Hittites were 2 of the great superpowers of their day. After years and years of brutal fighting, the legendary Battle of Kadesh ended in a draw, a bloody stalemate. Both sides finally realized that this endless war was getting them absolutely nowhere, which led to a truly historic breakthrough. They signed the world's first known peace treaty, and reading these words from over 3,000 years ago, it feels so incredibly modern. They laid out mutual non-aggression, and for a while, peace actually led to prosperity, with the 2 empires sharing knowledge of agriculture and metalworking. It's amazing. Of course, diplomacy doesn't always work. At the Battle of Marathon, the Athenians were outnumbered 2-1 by the massive invading Persian army, a real David versus Goliath situation. But by using superior tactics, they somehow pulled off a stunning victory that saved their young democracy from being wiped out. But hey, interaction wasn't always violent. Take the Silk Road. It wasn't just one road, but this huge network connecting the empires of Rome, Persia, and Han China. This was basically the world's first internet, and it was a pipeline for so much more than just silk, gunpowder, paper, religions, philosophies. They all traveled these routes, and they fundamentally reshaped every single culture they touched. So why does any of this ancient history matter today? Because these building blocks, these old blueprints, they're still with us. Their world echoes in ours. That wild experiment that started on the streets of Athens, it's still being debated, fought over, and strived for all across the globe. While the Babylonian idea that we should be governed by a written code, that's the bedrock of our modern justice systems. The Greek tradition of questioning everything, of using logic and reason to figure out our world, that is the very foundation of modern science and philosophy. And that drive to expand, to conquer, to unify, perfected by powers like Rome and Persia, it continues to shape geopolitics to this very day. So, here's the bottom line. These blueprints, from law codes to social pyramids to big ideas, are the legacy of the ancient world. They built their civilizations on these foundations, and it all leads to one final question for us. What are we building now? What will our echo be?